is in becoming an artist and an animator. You had an interesting experience as a child visiting Don Bluth.
Yeah, I was about 14, and the Don Bluth studio had been in the country for a few years, so when I was been a little bit younger, I'd been aware that cartoons were being made in Dublin, which was kind of exciting as a kid because it made it feel kind of possible that you could work in animation. And I got a chance to visit a friend's auntie was an animator up in the studio, and I went actually with the art director, Ross Stewart. We were friends since we were kids, and we went up to visit the studio. But we were actually a bit put off animation when we visited because it seemed so factory-like. We didn't realise how much the labour was divided, and we both sort of came out of it feeling that we preferred to work in comics. And it was only kind of later that we got the animation bug again and started to get back interested in animation.
So how would you compare your illustration work with your animation work?
I actually think that here in the studio we've had a lot of really talented designers and artists over the years, people that I met in college, and we kind of always had a lot of illustration work going on at the same time. Because like I set up the studio while I was still in college, I set up the company, and then when we moved down to Kilkenny, a group of us from Dublin came down. And so we were always interested in illustration kind of concurrently with animation, and I think that's what made our work stand out, that we didn't do stuff in the typical animation style. We brought some of that illustration and slightly more artsy influence, I suppose people have called it, into our animation, and I think that's helped make it stand out, you know.
You mentioned about having sort of an artsy influence to it. Do you feel that there's animation that you've seen over the years that's motivated creating this style?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the first movies that I saw in college that was sort of like secret knowledge for just animators was Dick Williams. He was making a film called The Thief and the Cobbler over about 25 years. I'd never seen anything like it, and it had never been completed, so it was really sad. And it was just sort of being passed around on this kind of bootleg VHS when I was in college, and one of my teachers gave me a copy of it. All of us, the group of us that set up the studio, were really inspired by the fact that this guy had been making an independent movie on the back burner for so long. It was a sad story that didn't get finished, but the actual look of it was so amazing because he'd never seen anything like that in animation. It was that kind of 2.5D. He was looking at Persian art, trying to find a way to turn Persian miniatures into animation. It really impressed us and made me kind of think we could do something similar with Celtic art, you know. And so we looked at the visual art tradition in Ireland, which wasn't maybe as rich as the music tradition, but back in the Middle Ages we were really kind of world leaders in terms of visual art with the illuminated manuscripts. So that's when we sort of said, well, let's look at that and try and find a style that can be done in animation that's kind of unique to Ireland by taking our influence from there, in the same way that Dick Williams had been looking at Persian art.
What is the animation world like in Ireland? Beyond your studio, what else exists?
Well, it's funny what's happened in the last 10 years. Like, this is our 10th anniversary as a studio this year. We founded the company in 1999 and then set up the studio here in Kilkenny in 2000. And at that stage, the landscape was pretty bleak in Ireland. Most of my friends had to emigrate to work, and we set up the company just after the Don Bluth studio had left, and a lot of the American studios had left the country again. And it was only like companies like Brown Bag and Monster and stuff in Dublin that were similar to us, small studios. And then over the last 10 years, it's really exploded again, and there's a lot of exciting stuff happening, especially in Dublin. Lots of little studios doing their own projects as well as service work for America and Europe. So it's much more vibrant than it was 10 years ago now.
You know, what made you decide to start your own production company with Paul Young? And what was your mission, at least initially, and then, you know, maybe where it's going?
Yeah, I suppose like it was one of those organic things. It was kind of a way to try and make a living and stay in Ireland at the time whenever the only other option really was emigrating or working in computer games and stuff. And Paul and I had picked up bits and pieces of freelance work while we were in college, and we sort of decided to pool our resources. Like, Paul was primarily an illustrator, and he was studying animation after already having had a degree in illustration from Belfast, and I was studying animation, so we sort of pulled our illustration and animation contacts together and started the studio that way. But from the very, very beginning, it tied in with an ambition to make the feature film. Like, The Secret of Kells was originally a very different project that I'd been working on in college, like based on the Book of Kells and all, but it wasn't the script that we have in the final mark, but that was there from the start.
As far as your choices of style of animation, you know, compared to what is being produced in Ireland and elsewhere, you know, how did you decide, both in shorts and other pieces and in your feature, it seems you have a distinctive style?
Yeah, like we really tried to work on a unique kind of style, especially for the feature. As I was just saying already, you know, based on Celtic art. I should mention the team a little bit. I mean, there was a lot of people, a really collaborative effort. For a lot of the background style, my friend Ross Stewart, who's actually a white gallery painter, brought a lot of his own kind of landscape painting and illustrative kind of style to the look of the film. And I worked on the character designs with Barry Reynolds, a talented character designer I met in college as well. He worked on the film a lot over the 10 years. There was a whole team of people that we sort of pulled together to develop the style, but when we first met Les Amateurs, they were the co-producers that we met in 2003, and they were in the middle of making the Triplets of Belleville, and they were interested in working with us in our film. And so we kind of looked at their whole body of work that we hadn't been as aware of up until then, and we saw all the French animation like Kirikou, stuff like that. That was very influential too, because we saw that people were doing things different with animation than we were seeing, like, for example, coming out of the Disney studio or whatever in the States.
Yeah, I noticed that there was a connection with that, and also Kirikou, which, especially the first one, that was my favorite.
Yeah, Kirikou was lovely, and it was a pity because I got an English language version off Didier when we first started working with him. We took a look at it just to see, okay, here's a €4 million independently produced European feature film, this is what it can look like. And we were pretty impressed, because it didn't look like a cheap knockoff of a Disney movie, it kind of had its own voice. And later I met Michel Usselot, who was the director, and he was a very kind friend to me over the years, kind of encouraging us to find our own look. So I think early on some of the designs that myself and Barry had done for the characters, in contrast to Ross's backgrounds, had been a little bit more Disney influenced. We were kind of impressed by movies like Mulan and Hercules. And Michel and Didier really kind of said, go even further and find something more unique and maybe a little bit more flat, more like Eastern European animation. And so we pushed the designs further in that direction.
Do you have any commercial projects that you'd like to share with us that you're most proud of? And what is your process like versus features or more personal shorts?
The commercial projects that we've done in terms of advertising and stuff, they informed the way we worked on the feature to a certain extent, because we had to prepare things very well, and we had to always have a kind of a punchy style, something that would stand out to impress the client to win the gig, because commercials are such a competitive market. You really have to pitch hard and show something kind of different to land the gig in the first place. So that also kind of broadened our scope, trying out different styles and things. But we've done everything. I mean, we also made quite a successful TV series at the same time as working on the feature called Skunk Fu, and it was shown on Cartoon Network and like all over the world, you know. So I mean, the studio sort of has been fairly versatile in that way.
So tell us about your first two animated shorts, Couch Potato and Dress Rehearsal. What was the motivation behind these pieces? Oh,
well, they were just like little sort of gag pieces that we got some finance from the Irish Film Board first for Dress Rehearsal. Back in 2000, 2001, a big part of our business was internet stuff. There was kind of an internet boom, and we were using Flash animation a lot. And the Irish Film Board gave us a small budget to try and make a short film in Flash. So I made Dress Rehearsal, which was about a magic wand. And again, it was more an animation exercise than anything, but it won a couple of awards, which was nice, and started to get us noticed because we were so ambitious. Same with Couch Potato. Actually, Couch Potato, I took some unemployed characters that I used to try and get a pitch for a commercial, and we didn't win the pitch, and I was disappointed not to get a chance to try out the style. So I kind of invented Couch Potato as a way to get to experiment a bit with stop motion and the different style that I'd figured out for a commercial campaign that didn't go ahead. So those shorts were more style experiments than anything else.
You've also worked as more like a designer or art director. There was another short that you had worked on, a 10-minute short.
Backwards Boy, Cooling Dulak. That was Nora's. Nora had made two short films that did quite well in the first festival circuit, and they were a little bit more elaborate than my shorts. And that's why I looked at the Pixar way of working, where they have a director and a co-director. And I sort of asked Nora, because she's one of the founders of the studio, so I looked, you come on as a sort of co-pilot role on the feature, because her shorts had been a little bit more narrative and maybe a little deeper than mine up until then. I thought I could bring some of that filmmaking experience to the feature when we were going ahead. So I've been the art director on Backwards Boy, which was a traditional Irish story about a boy who was born with his head on backwards and the kind of trials and tribulations of that.
So from here you moved into animated features, the first being The Secret of Kells. Tell us more about the story and its origins.
The Secret of Kells actually started off as a project that I thought about in college. We were looking at the stories and myths and legends and the history around the Book of Kells itself. And the Book of Kells is like it's the four Gospels in an illuminated manuscript, but it's almost like an elaborate picture book or comic book when you look at it, because it's so lavishly illustrated that you can almost not see the text. And you can tell that there was some kind of meditative aspect or something to the monk's work in making it so ornamental. And so the first story that we thought about was what sort of conflict was there going to be between the monks in this monastery at this time, living in this kind of hostile world where there was Vikings attacking and all sorts of difficulties to overcome, and they were trying to make this piece of art, What kind of world was that? Like, the world at the time must have been richly populated by imagination, as well, because these were kind of a crossover period between paganism and the new religion of Christianity. So we thought there was a lot of inspiration and stuff in that time period. And so it was later that we kind of settled on focusing the story on Brendan, who was the little boy in the story, and bringing in all the fairy elements and the different legends and stuff like that that we allude to in the film.
The original title of the film was Brendan and the Secret of Kells?
Oh, even more original than that. It was called Rebel Once Upon a Time, which referred to a character that we cut. The main character originally was Brendan's mentor, who was trying to get the Book of Kells completed against kind of overwhelming odds, even from within the Abbey. And then we sort of dropped it and focused more on Brendan. It's called Brendan and the Secret of Kells in France and in other countries, but Brendan was sort of a very common name in Ireland, so we released it just as the Secret of Kells. We wrote it with a scriptwriter called Fabrice Zukowski from France that Les Amateurs brought on, and he helped us focus it more on Brendan and make it more of a kind of a classic hero's journey. We're looking at like Joseph Campbell's type hero's journey books, you know, and having a look at that whole structure. And when we brought that in, it took much better shape and became less kind of meandering as an idea and more focused on Brendan's journey. I think it's fairly universal. It's a journey of a young boy kind of finding his own place and standing up to his uncle and standing up to his own fears and stuff, you know.
Well, going along with that, how were you able to keep the origins of the story natural? How did you address this in the script and production?
What happened was, I think Fabrice brought a fairly universal attitude to it, because he wasn't Irish, so he wasn't encumbered with all the research and stuff that we'd done, and he helped us pare it down to focus really on Brendan's story. And Aisling was the little fairy character that we had in it, and her relationship with Brendan has kind of become the heart of the story, So those two characters became the focal point, and we knew that that would appeal to, an audience anywhere in the world. And then for me to try and keep it true to the original inspiration and stuff like that, I tried to weave in all the Irish legends and stuff, but in a way that would be understandable to a universal audience, not just people who knew about Irish history and legends.
Going along with that too, what did the research consist of to sort of create the locations and the characters?
Initially we looked a lot at, of course, at the Book of Kells itself, and then we broadened out